Is there a day or a story? Was there a moment where you're like, this story needs to be told. We got to do it different.
It's funny. I don't know the moment or like where it all happened. 2 years ago, I was, I think I was just contemplating the types of stories that I wanted to tell.
Hmm.
And I had had these experiences where I was looking for media for my kids,
Hmm.
specifically for my sons, who are at the time, they were both, I guess, 9 and 5 in there. And I was not, and I was like, I really want to have a movie that they can watch that they enjoy, or a
Hmm.
story that they can listen to that they enjoy, where there are strong male heroes. Because I
Yeah.
love a lot of the new like Disney movies. I love Moana. I think Moana is like one of the best Disney movies, like
I
period.
kind of agree. Yeah.
I think it's awesome, but it's hard for them to see themselves in that role, and so the temptation is okay. I'll just go back to some of the stories that I grew up on in the 80s and 90s. Of course, they've seen Star Wars and things like that, um, but there's a lot of cultural baggage from movies of that time when there were a lot of strong male heroes. Like
Hmm.
there's a lot of womanizing and there's a lot of less than virtuous behavior,
Hmm.
and like the female characters are maligned and they are doofuses, and like we've kind of changed the script a little bit culturally, so like
Hmm.
a lot of male characters and stuff now are a bit fuddy-duddies.
Hmm.
um and I understand the correction. Like I understand the correction because it was so bad before, but I couldn't find any. I was just
Hmm.
like, I'm sure I could look harder. Obviously, they're the Harry Potters and Luke Skywalkers, and those are like
Yeah.
culturally dominant, and they were engaging with those. But I wanted more for
Hmm.
them, and so that was then the seed of the idea was in that. I wanted a story for them where they could have a strong male hero who exemplified what was so virtuous about a lot of the characters like Moana,
Hmm.
where their self actualization and who they are is not dependent on other people. I guess
Hmm.
is sort of what that was a bad answer. I'm gonna do this. Can I go back just for like 1 second?
Yeah, sure, sure.
I just want to. I think the source code was I want to tell stories for them that draws on the strong male archetype
Hmm.
without the baggage of some of the cultural icons we've had before, where they
Okay.
aren't wonderful. And so
Can you give
that
some
was the source
examples?
code.
Like, what are some movies that are
I mean, like
particularly
Hercules.
egregious?
Hercules
Oh,
is
okay.
one where you go back to
The
Hercules because it's
cartoon
like
or any of the other
it's the
renditions?
cartoon. I'm talking about the
Okay.
Disney cartoon because I was like,
Okay.
oh well, let me just go to Hercules, and it's like tons of sexualization, like peeping
Mm.
tom moments, and
Right.
there's just like and I don't want them to have that associated with masculinity. I
Hmm.
want them to have virtuous, pure masculinity where it's sacrificial and it isn't self-serving and it
Hmm.
isn't driven by ego. And so
Hmm.
that was some of the stuff that I was finding, or even like Indiana Jones, right? I love showing them parts of Indiana Jones, but it's in
Parts.
there.
Yeah.
It's in there, right? The womanizing aspects are in there. And you have Luke Skywalker, and Luke Skywalker is great, and you have Harry Potter, and Harry Potter's great, and I love both of those characters. But I
Hmm.
just wanted them to have an archetypical male hero that
Hmm.
exemplified and maybe learned from some of the correction that we've had now. So the place I went to was like the archetype of archetypes of a male hero, which is St. George. It's
Hmm.
something I grew up with and, knowing of the St. George and the Dragon legend. And I had always loved the legend. I think
Hmm.
the other thing that was inspirational to me was that it is, it's a remnant of the medieval tradition to have the Catholic imagination, right, be on full display, but it's not like tied to facticity. It
Say
is
more. What is
there's
that? Yeah. What
what I'm
unpack
trying to
that?
say is like they were willing in the Middle Ages, right, to use the imagination
Hmm.
aligned with these stories that were true to some degree to build upon them and to create something more robust and symbolic that
Hmm.
would get to the truth without being too concerned about the facts. And that's what's interesting about St. George is
Hmm.
we know like nothing about him.
Hmm.
We know he was a martyr in the early church. We know he was a Roman soldier, and that is basically it. In the Eastern traditions, there's a little more. His parents were martyred. You know a little bit about who his parents were. But the great part about St. George is he's sort of a blank canvas. He did this wonderful thing. He gets tied to this archetype of the Thracian horseman, the saint horseman, and who has the lance and is defeating the dragon. And then that symbolism snowballs and grows to the point in the Middle Ages you get the Golden Legend, and you get this high medieval sort of like Arthurian retelling of a story about him as this brave knight who comes and saves the princess and kills the dragon. And it's not true in a modern conception of truth. Not in a historical sense of truth, but it is the most true from a symbolic sense, right? Is that
in a space of meta reality? Have you heard Jordan Peterson talk about how fiction is true, even more true than not at a meta level? How he talks about God and myth is like, that the true myth or the true story. Have you heard him speak on that?
Oh yeah. He's drawing from a very Jungian sort of tradition, and Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces and all of that. And I think it was also C.S. Lewis who said that Christ was. You probably know this quote. Christ was the myth that was true.
Yeah.
I think it was Lewis.
I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know where it is either. It's the type of thing. It's in the bank somewhere back there, but. No, and I think that was what was cool about George, right? Is that he did confront the dragon of Rome, and he confronted the dragon of evil and the problem of evil in the world, and he overcame it with virtue. And so that was 2 years ago, and we decided very quickly. So I run a media production company. We do a lot of agency work. We tell stories for different organizations. But doing this as a full movie or an animated movie would be way more than we could cash flow.
I mean, there's bits in the trailer that look fully animated. Like,
that was it. Yeah. Well,
how did you produce that?
We figured we can blow the budget on the trailer. No, that was part of it. So part of it, honestly, we have a talented group of people here and connections, and we were able to do that fairly cheap as well. But we decided it would be a lot easier to just tell this story in audio, to see if it finds purchase with people, to see if it is resonant in the way I hoped it would be resonant, and then go from there. And that snowballed into a 2-year process. And it was honestly one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on. Yeah.
The best and worst reaction.
So the best reaction was from a mom who we sent it to early on, and she said, and I'm not saying this, but she said it was the modern Lewis or Tolkien. Now,
cool.
I didn't write it. I helped, but so I will take that. I think it was awesome. So that was a big thing. I think the best thing too is the other best reaction we got was from a friend of ours whose son was listening to it and said, he told me that, my friend Derek, he said, my son was listening to this and he genuinely thinks he can defeat dragons now. And I started crying. And I was like, that's it. That is 100% it. And the worst reaction is probably when my son was going through some of the early script draft stuff, because I would use my kids as beta testers. He goes, Dad, this section feels like when a story stops and they tell you to go to confession. And I was like, all right. Well, and that is not in the podcast. Yeah. So, I mean, that was a fine line we were trying to cross too, right? Which is because I think one of the challenges we wanted to do was make a story that had all the hallmarks of what is good about Catholic storytelling and avoided all the bad parts. It is not a Bible thumping thing. It's not going to explain anything to you. It is entertainment, Okay. And we wanted to make sure that the faith element was there because George couldn't have defeated the dragon without that. But we didn't want it to be a treatise on how to obey your parents. Yeah. That was not our goal.
I have so many questions. I'm trying to decide which thread to pull. So you said Catholic imagination, which I want to ask you about that. But then you also said the best of Catholic storytelling and avoiding the worst of it. So, um, without being Bible thumping and all this, that is a massive theme for us at Legend Fiction. Is we want to avoid the worst of what's become associated with a lot of Christic storytelling. What do you say is the best and worst, and where is it getting better? Where could
That's
it
a
be?
great question. That's a great question. I I think that and it was just from George, this is from George himself. David Henry was the actor, a friend of mine,
Okay.
and he said that we often get our priorities mixed up when we're going into storytelling, and that and I don't know if this is his or where he got it from, but I think it's really brilliant. But he said we often, as Christians or as Catholics, when we're approaching storytelling, we think we have to educate first and then elevate people and then entertain. Like
Mm,
that's the priority stack,
interesting.
right?
Yeah.
We're trying to educate first. And that's something that I've seen in like so much work that I've done or I've been participant in,
Hmm.
is the concern is making sure all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
everything is hyper specific.
Canon, lawyer,
And
on speed
yeah,
dial.
exactly. You
Yeah.
got your imprimatur and all of that.
Hmm.
But in order to actually execute on storytelling, the hierarchy has to be flipped. You have to entertain first
Hmm.
so that you can elevate and educate people. And I think that's
Yeah.
like you have to entertain people. You have to tell a story that's worth telling.
Yeah.
And the beauty, and I even think like, if you want to roll this all the way back, to Christ telling his parables, he was not explaining those things in detail
Deliberately
after. Right.
obfuscated
Yeah, it was
answers.
like
Yeah.
it was like it was like, and this is a horrible analogy that I'll be called out for, but in Zen Buddhism, right, they have this idea of this mantra or this phrase that you can say that will
Hmm.
unlock enlightenment.
Right.
It's not a map that you have to follow. It's something
Hmm.
you have to ruminate on.
It's
And
like
I
a
think,
koan. I think they also call them koans, right? It's
yeah,
a specific
exactly, right.
story that's deliberately meant to pull you up short. And a lot of Christ's stories, our Lord's stories, do the same thing. They're meant to pull you up short because the answer is not what you expect, and you have to unpick what you think is normal, which
It,
and then it can end up changing you.
yeah, 100%. It's like storytelling is deeper than logic.
Yeah.
And it's truer than logic
Yeah.
sometimes. So I think like
Agreed.
that's the thing, is you have to
Yeah.
entertain. So that was the main correction we wanted to make.
Mm.
Firebreaker is not to evangelize primarily. It's not to educate primarily. If it was an educational thing, we have all sorts of historical inaccuracies in there, figure them out,
Sure, sure.
but from an entertainment perspective, we want to captivate the heart. We want them to fall in love with the characters, and we want them to go on the journey with the characters themselves. So that's something I think we've struggled with for a long time. I think
Hmm.
it's a noble thing, or it's a noble motivation to say, I want this to be right or true,
Hmm.
or to effectively communicate
Yeah.
Christ and the gospel. I think that's a noble thing. But if you're so worried about it that it is making you unable to tell a story, then
Yeah.
you've lost the thread.
Well, you've forgotten you've forgotten the point of the job. So somebody who's in entertainment or trying to create a story that is entertaining or meant to be entertaining, the point of an author is to tell a really good story. The point of an educator is to educate. And when an author goes and tries to educate, you end up with, well, is this a confession moment, Daddy?
Yeah.
Um, if you can't even, it's like a painter. If a painter can be trying to craft something sublime, but if they haven't learned the craft of actually painting really well, everybody will get stuck at the fact that painting is crap, and they
Yeah.
just start to deconstruct the method instead of actually understanding the message. Um, so having a really clear sense of, what is it you're trying to accomplish? If you are trying to straight up evangelize or straight up educate, then don't pretend you're telling a story. It's a
Exactly.
completely different function, different role. And only a master like C.S. Lewis could pull a Jesus lion out of, and still not be educating, and just
I think that,
entertain all the way
and
through.
I think that's just because he was captivated by Aslan. I don't th- I my assumption, and I don't actually know this, right? But my assumption is this is an artistic impulse that he has.
Mhm.
And then the beauty of it that does evangelize follows from his earnest devotion to storytelling.
Mhm.
Like I think that there's no way that there's no way in a committee you come to Jesus as a lion, as a calculated strategy for evangelization, and
Yeah.
and fawns and all of that.
Well,
That's
again, I
pure
don't think
artistry.
he was trying to evangelize. I mean, I know that almost every time for over the last 10 years, well, actually before, where I would be trying to craft stories, and a lot of authors have mentioned this sort of thing too, where they will try to create a clear come to the altar moment, or an altar call, or a clear Christ figure who ends up at a Calvary thing, and it's a bit of gospel fan fiction that they're putting in elvish male and with a couple of works for um, the originality of it. Um, when really it's like I want to ask you more about Firebreaker, right? Because you were captivated by the specific thing. You could say the gospel of the story itself. There's the gospels and the gospel message, but then the story itself has its own message. And I
Yeah.
think that's what Lewis ended up doing, is just captivated by there's a message in this story, and I can clothe it in all of these characters. But this particular message, this thing that can bring life to other people, that can be truer than the historical reality of things. The historical reality of things is trying to embody and incarnate this idea or this set of ideas or these stories. And so let's just try to package this, and it ends up enchanting a century of people. With what you've done. So first I want to ask you, why the name Firebreaker? And
Yeah.
then I'll ask you a question about mythology, but why the name Firebreaker?
Oh man, I don't know where it came from. It was the name Firebreaker happened almost as soon as the idea came. So I had the idea. I talked to my business partner. I talked to my wife and my business partner's wife, and we all got together and we said, "Is this like a direction we want to take? And do this?" And we all agreed. And I said, "It's St. George." And we're gonna do it like it was Lord of the Rings or like it was Tangled. Like we'll do what Tangled did to the
Mhm,
Rapunzel story, but we'll do it with St. George.
mhm.
And also I love Tangled too.
Yeah,
I happen to like these movies.
one of
Um,
those that one really, yeah, it did it really well.
yeah. So, and then the name Firebreaker, I was just like, I thought it sounded cool. Because he wasn't a fire. It was like, it's like the name, it's like a firefighter. Like little girls too want to be firefighters, right?
Yeah.
But, so it was just I feel like it was a zestier version of that. Only later did I realize that there is a transformer called Firebreaker I was unaware
Oh,
of. And I
okay.
was not aware that there was a professional wrestler way back who was Firebreaker. Now,
Okay.
uh,
Yeah.
completely separate, completely
Uh-huh.
separate genre, so I'm not too worried about it. But yeah, I just thought, like the dragon,
Hmm.
he's putting the fire out, and
Yeah.
he's breaking the stranglehold that the
Hmm.
dragon has on the people, and so
Hmm.
he's the firebreaker.
So that right there is what you just said is really intriguing to me in terms of a, a storytelling direction. So you identified Lord of the Rings for its high fantasy epic tone, but then also Tangled because Pixar, well, you can argue this, I guess, up to a point in its film series, has nailed the essentials of excellent storytelling, character-based
Oh
storytelling.
yeah.
So putting those two together, I mean, what a great combo. First, and then doing that with saints, or at least with this
With
particular
the same.
saint. Um,
Yeah.
what have I imagine there have been more conversations over the last 2 years? You guys have been walking around that juxtaposition, or those three things coming together.
Well, there was a lot of conversations about like how do we do this right. So right after that decision, I called my friend Jim Morlino, who he's a writer. He's done audio dramas. He has his own films, and
Mhm.
I said, "Would you like to hop on board with
Mhm.
this and do this with us?" And he was like, he got it immediately, and we started. And he brought on his son Dominic Morlino to help. Who Dominic is fantastic with structure. Like Dominic
Yes.
is a structure writer, and he I think we moved so much quicker because he was involved. And yeah, we got to the first. So then we started doing, we tried to run it sort of like they run TV shows, where we
Hmm.
had every week we had writers' room meetings where we talked about the story and different things that could happen. And then, they would submit drafts and then we would go through them and we'd change the story and flip it around and whatever. I went back to our first writers' room meeting and we had cracked, I watched it because we have them all recorded. And we had cracked 85% of the core narrative, and even some of the weirder turns we take in it, we got
Hmm.
immediately. So it was just, I think it was just an idea that was waiting to happen,
Hmm.
more so than we did anything with it. We're just recovering an old story and we're, you
Yeah.
know, playing it to a different tune.
If you were to do another saint, now that you've pulled through
Yeah,
this, who would you pick?
that's funny. Um, So I am in the process. So we are making a movie uh, where I am telling the story of Blessed Stanley Rother, and so we are filming that next year. That is a completely different thing. It's not fantastic. It's a historical biopic. It's
Hmm.
it's for grown-ups. It's not the same thing at all. If I was going to do something in the vein of Firebreaker, um, it would very likely be another quote unquote Firebreaker. And
Hmm.
there are actually many saints who encountered dragons and fought them in the legendarium. Like there's a bunch, and there's one we're targeting for a potential season two. So I'm not going to say who, but I'm
Okay,
pretty excited about it because it's a different energy, and but the dragon is defeated nonetheless.
that's pretty cool. Who are
Yeah.
some of the, so don't mention that saint, darn it, but who are some of the other characters that light you up from fantasy
From
dragons?
Saints.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is they're all the dragon fighting ones are still on the table. So I'm going, and we're trying to weave a bunch of them together into this dragon slaying saints connected universe that is quote unquote Firebreaker. Um, no,
Not at all cool.
yeah, no, right. So that's the challenging thing is I kind of want to
Gotcha.
keep
Okay.
that locked.
All right. Well, then let's just not go there. If you were to do outside of the Firebreaker series, but copying the same, this is what you've mentioned the Golden Legend a couple of times, and this is something that animates me a lot. It's the how do you say this, remythologizing of the lives of the saints, because we've been stuck in this. We've talked about the historicity of things. We've
Yeah.
been stuck in this whatever, overly historical and literalist, demythologized, de-enchanted, de-spiritualized
Yeah, just the brute
mindset.
facts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're very materialist about stuff, and then we go and we look at the lives of saints, and I mean, they're not only weird, they end up making decisions that seem either harmful or counterintuitive, and then they end up getting slapped with a saint label, and um, we misunderstand a lot of them.
Yep.
We misattribute their reasonings, and we have no idea what to do with half of their visions, or even the fact
Yeah.
that they might have had them and they didn't talk about it. So for me, I don't know how, but I'm compelled by how do we re-mythologize. These have now become mythical characters. They not only did exist, they now continue to exist in a meta, heaven state where they continue to re-engage with, well, the world and
Yeah.
and those who invoke them. They're patron saints. They're involved in people's vocations. It's not like they're gone. They never left.
Yeah.
Some of them are still animating their bodies. Like they just dug up Saint Teresa of Avila, I think, and her body was still incorrupt after 400 years or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
So she's still paying attention, to, oh gosh, or Saint Teresa of Lisieux, right? Dropping rose petals and answering
Mhm.
novenas, and other saints doing stuff. We 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 go to mass on Sundays and we pay lip service to the creed and stuff, but we actually, as average Americans, don't actually live in the world that all the saints live in. And it's that gap, that disconnect that so fascinates me. So here's my question then. You've done something that remythologizes a saint. And okay, you went and did it with a saint that we know nothing about. So there's a whole lot of
It's a
fun and
lot
license that
easier.
can happen. Yeah. But if you were to do other saints, maybe not a dragon thing, have you
Yeah.
thought about that?
No, so I have nothing that I would say. I would say I have things that have captivated my imagination with like no plans, right? I don't have
Mhm.
plans for these, but these are ideas that have captivated me before. I think one of the saints who used the imagination best was
Mhm.
Saint Ignatius of Loyola
Yeah.
through the spiritual exercises. It was the active imagination where the imagination was being employed to drag you, like
Mhm.
sometimes literally just drag you spiritually to Christ.
Mhm.
And so this, I mean, the spiritual exercises, the exercises themselves are highly symbolic and legendary. Like the
Mhm.
way he writes them are beautiful. You have to imagine yourselves,
Yeah.
you have to imagine yourself on the battle lines of Christ's army, and all the army of evil is ahead of you and Satan. And you are looking at the standards of the devil and you're looking at the standard of Christ, and you have to basically ask yourself, who am I fighting for? And so I've been captivated by the idea of, okay, you take Ignatius of Loyola, and this isn't the true story, but I think it's kind of the true story. You take someone like Ignatius of Loyola, and he's Mr. Miyagi, and then you have someone like St. Francis Xavier, and he's the Karate Kid, and he is giving him the secret knowledge. Bad word, I know. We're not
Yeah.
Gnostic. I get it.
Keep
He's given
going.
him the secret knowledge of how to unlock this part of himself that
Yes.
transforms him from someone who is in the world into
Very
someone who
Inception.
is,
There's
yeah,
a total Inception movie right there.
exactly, right. And I mean it because like the symbolism is there, the power is there, the imagination, the imagination is unlocked
Mm-hmm.
in the spiritual exercises, and you can, like, when you read those as like someone who's like an artist, you can really feel and see them.
Yeah.
And so that's one that I don't have a story for it, but that's certainly
I
captivated
mean,
me.
you're getting my wheels turning on that one. You've mentioned that you're a dad and you have kids, and you're looking at the landscape of other families and people at the parish and people you know and so on. What do you think um, most, or maybe a lot, of people get wrong, especially Christians, Catholics? What do you think that a lot of us get wrong about imagination?
Yeah.
And maybe how are you trying to fix it for yourself, your family?
It's funny because so I was and maybe this is too much information, but when I was younger, I was definitely in a family that had some fear of some of these stories, or the sort
Mhm.
of like satanic panic
Yeah.
was definitely, we were singed by that as kids. And so I
Mhm.
think that concern is there. I think that's largely abated. I don't think people are as worried about that, at least in my circles anymore. Um,
Mhm.
but I think sometimes we get so concerned with, I think we have a stance often that's like, the world is not making us the stories we need or we want. Everything's wrong, everything's awful. No one's telling these right stories. And it's like, yeah, but you don't need a permission to tell a story,
Mhm.
right? You can tell a story, and you can tell, and it doesn't need to be a movie. It can be you just tell a story to your kids, and it doesn't need to be a movie. It can be a podcast, or it doesn't need to be a novel. It can be a short story. I think there's I don't think we give ourselves permission to engage with storytelling, and I think that we all should.
Mhm.
Like, I think that's something that, I don't know if that makes any sense, but
No,
I
keep
think,
going. Unpack that.
yeah, I think that there's a general fear towards like cultural bugaboos uh,
Mhm.
in the world, and we are worried about cultural infiltration and
Mhm.
our perfect little angel children not being or being poisoned by this stuff. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that is bad out there, but you don't need to protect kids from scary things. You don't need to protect them from things that will make them question or make them like contend with reality. That is the beauty of storytelling, is that they can feel the fear of evil, and they can see things that are confusing, and they can learn to sort those things through storytelling. And I think, yeah, that not every storyteller in the world is trustworthy, but and I get that because people have agendas, and there's all sorts of people who are trying to evangelize. Um, but yeah, I think it's important for kids to be exposed to things that make them think and make them feel and make them
Mhm.
fear, and yeah, I feel like that was very convoluted.
there aren't always comfortable answers. Um, Sometimes it's just a matter of what is best for my family and my situation. And that's where I have a hard time, is when you get some people who get really dogmatic about stuff that has not been elevated to the level of dogma. They demand that you be in the confession line for something. It's that space of freedom that I want to return to a lot of authors and return
Sure.
to creators and families and readers. It's like, um, I mean, I think this is kind of a reason why the Index of Forbidden Books was taken down, maybe because nobody paid attention to it, or maybe it was time
Yeah.
to rethink what it means to forbid something. Because instead of yeah, not only does the church have a different relation to us now than she did in the past. It was a lot more hierarchical in the past, a lot more authoritarian. Now she realizes it's maybe not a good idea to play that role, in the same way that we parents, for a period are very authoritarian with our kids. And then comes a point where they have to grow up. And so you sort of hope that you inoculated them, or you formed them so that they could stand on their own. Otherwise, you end up trying to live their lives for them. And of course, that ends up just being like well, that's not a healthy situation. They
No.
haven't grown up into being actual adults.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's what I think is the value of. So in terms of storytelling,
Yeah.
it's that ability to transmit experiences. It's that ability to sort of induct a kid without giving them the answers. You're able to induct them into aspects of reality that are just as real as the table and
Yeah.
dinner.
Well, that's the G.K. Chesterton quote that I'm paraphrasing it, but everyone butchers it. So my paraphrase is
You're in
probably
good
closer.
company. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he has the quote, which is, fairy tales don't introduce children to the concept of bogey, or we could say dragon. A child has known that the dragon has been there intimately ever since he was born. What fairy tales give them is a Saint George who can conquer the dragon. And I think that's why it's beautiful, right? And why storytelling is beautiful. It's because if you come into this world without any narrative, right? And there's no narrative given to you, it is beautiful, but it is chaotic and dangerous. But if you have a narrative that you can hook yourself into, right? Where especially a narrative that is a true narrative, that there is a God and he loves you and he can empower you to do wonderful, beautiful things. That's the dragon's foil. So the foil to chaos is a God who loves you. And we only get that through the transmission of story, right? That's only through the scriptures. That's only through Christ telling his parables. It's only through him unlocking the scripture and the story to us. And I think I think that is a huge motivation, right? Is just to say, like, let's give them lenses with which to view the world and the problems in the world and the difficulties in the world and the sufferings in the world. Let's give them a lens through which to view it. And I wouldn't say that was like a primary motivation for Firebreaker, right? It's not like we had to say, oh, in scene 3, does this show a child that they can do this thing? That wasn't it at all. It's just that these principles are stuff that we were ruminating on and thinking about, and allowed. We're kind of the the mulch and the fertilizer from which the story grew.
Yeah. You've talked a lot about imagination, and a lot of the work that you do requires a lot of creativity and imagination, making all of these films, and of course Firebreaker. Why does it matter so much to you?
Why does imagination?
Yeah, it matters so much to you.
I watched a lot of Barney when I was little, and they said, "Just imagine."
Okay, yeah, seriously.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I don't know. I don't know where this whole journey began, and I don't know. I know I was a kid who had a lot of time.
Okay.
I had a lot of time to use my imagination, and I had a kid, and it was certainly something that was fostered by both of my parents. They both loved that I was thinking about these things or doing these things. I mean, for me, a lot of this was through the lens of film and photography, and I picked up a video camera when I was, I think 4 was the first time I picked up a video camera, because my dad just bought it and he immediately put it on my shoulder.
Wow.
And I was captivated by that. And then I have the story, which is quintessential for like any millennial, filmmaker is I loved Star Wars, and I wanted to make Star Wars.
Mhm.
So I think it was just what captivated and what drew me, and what I wasn't interested in sports, or I played a lot of them, but I was not interested in them. They didn't captivate me. I was more interested in philosophy and filmmaking and
Mhm.
making cool special effects and reading the lives of the saints. I read a ton of lives of the saints when I was little. They were all bad, but I read them.
What's you start to wrap up here a little bit. What's a movie
Sure.
that you've watched recently that you were really surprised at, you really liked?
That I was really surprised at and I really liked. Let me think.
Or maybe were really surprised that you liked it. You thought it was actually a pretty good show.
Give me like 20 seconds
Sure.
because I keep a list of all of the movies that I watched.
Ah, that is smart. I
Uh,
just trust on the fact that I've got my Netflix past, viewing stuff and just
it,
remember the ones.
yeah, I'm just gonna sort by recent. So it's you can use it. Uh it's called Letterboxed. Have you ever used that?
I have. Well, I mean, I've heard of it and I set up a profile and just
It's really
never
good,
went. Yeah.
and I have a much better answer than I would have given otherwise. So here we go. All right, what's a movie that I was really surprised that I loved? I think the one, I mean, everyone told me I should love it was Godzilla minus one. I
Okay.
mean, this is a very simple answer, right? What I am not a Godzilla person.
Hmm.
Godzilla was never a thing for me. Big monster movies, kaiju, that stuff, it was never
Yeah.
my bag. But I had this recommended to me so many times.
Hmm.
And then I watched it, and it's a beautiful movie.
What did
It's
you
a
love about
beautiful
it?
movie. I think that it is a movie that contends with suffering and with trauma and with humanity in a way that it's a movie, it's a Japanese movie.
Hmm.
Western movies that are popcorn movies don't
Hmm.
do anymore. They're not
Yeah.
concerned about it anymore. And there's a lot of fun and games in a lot of Western movies, but there's like what's interesting about Godzilla minus one is it has fun and games parts of it, but it still gets you. It still
Hmm.
gets you to think about. They're contending with like what it means to be a kamikaze fighter,
Hmm.
right? And is that sacrifice something that is noble and good, or is it something that's you're being manipulated? And it's like that's the type of things they're thinking about in a Godzilla movie, and it's really well done. And it's also
Hmm.
inspiring because it's like a super small team of people who made it. It is
Yeah.
like a
Wow.
fraction of the size of the budget of Western movies, and it's a great story. It's a great story. So
Yeah.
yeah, Godzilla minus one.
Okay. I loved they did something from a narrative standpoint, which was so simple. And it was honestly most of the Godzilla actual destruction and stuff was just, okay, I didn't really pay attention too much to that. The part that really actually hit me was his relationship with I don't remember the characters' names, but that trio of the little holy family, the little family that
Yeah.
came together and they weren't married and the child wasn't theirs. And so in that sense, they were sort of a brother and sister. They're not even in it for the romance. They're there to try to keep each other alive. And there's this special bond that comes together around them. And that sense of we're all here to take care of each other and not just because we want to get something
Yep.
from each other, which is such a Western thing. In this story, because they extracted the romance from the family relationship, all you saw were human people um, really falling in love with each other, really taking care of each other, not because they were obligated to,
Yep.
but because they chose to. Like this is the right thing to do. This is how we live.
And we're getting into spoiler territory, but that was one note for me that I really loved was there and a spoiler alert for Godzilla minus one, but uh, at the
It's been
end,
out long enough.
yeah, at the end when he basically learns that he can do his responsibility for the people and still advocate for his own life, right? And he actually is empowered because he has done the right thing and he has served the right thing, and when he comes into his own as himself, then he is like ready, then he's ready to be with this woman. Like that's something that's like it's not, there's nothing needy about it at all. It's like, okay, I'm a full person. I can actually take care of you. And so it's like yeah, it is. It's
Yeah,
we it's
actually, what an ultimate George and the Dragon story right there. I mean,
I mean, honestly,
yeah,
yeah,
he not only
people
gets the
people be like,
princess.
of course you liked Godzilla. They're fighting a dragon. I gotta tell you, I've seen like a couple. It's never been my thing, honestly.
Yeah.
It's just really. Of course, I picked Godzilla. That's awful. Well, that's so funny.
Well, it didn't even cross my mind until you made that point. Until I mean, yes, he defeats the dragon, but ultimately that's ancillary to the fact that the dragon he had to overcome, at the core of the story, is himself
Yes.
and his own embarrassment for being alive at all. And
Yep.
everybody around him telling him, you deserve to be here. You're supposed to. It's valuable for you to be here. And he's not convinced of that. So he's crushed under the weight of this, well, kaiju of expectation
Yeah.
that he should have been. It's like this one Spartan warrior I remember who did not die in the Battle of Thermopylae, I think it was. He spent the
Mm.
rest of his life trying to die nobly, and he ended up becoming an excellent soldier. And he couldn't die, and it was his greatest shame, or something like
Yeah, it's funny because that relationship in Godzilla minus one, it is similar, right, to the Firebreaker thing. One of the
that.
things that because both of them are noble and stand on their feet and grow, and that was something that I loved about the Golden Legend,
Mhm.
is there's often this sort of like way that we will as postmodern people deride the male going and saving the princess in the tower from the monster. And I
Mhm.
totally understand that. That's not the Golden Legend.
Mhm.
While George is participant in saving the princess, in our story we call her Aya, um, she has to participate in order for the dragon to be destroyed. That is in the Golden Legend. Like she's the one who binds the dragon
Mhm.
and drags the dragon and tames the dragon and brings the dragon down. That it's both of them, and I think that's what's missing. Like that's a Catholic imagination thing, right? Is the complementarity of these two people, and
Mhm.
they're both of their genders and both of their virtues uniting to defeat the chaos around them.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that's in Godzilla minus one too. They should have called it Firebreaker. It's a great name. Or atomic breath breaker. That
Yeah.
yeah.
So, where can people find you online and
Sure.
support you, learn more about Firebreaker?
They can't find a lot about me, particularly online. I'm not too active directly on social media. But I would say go to firebreakerseries.com. That's where to look for Firebreaker. If you're interested
Mhm.
in the other work that I do, my agency is coronationmedia.com. And that's the best way to figure out. And Firebreaker is available anywhere as a podcast or YouTube. And yeah, that would be where to look.
If you had a minute to share a word of encouragement to creators and especially fiction authors out there, what would you want to say?
I would be I'm not a great I am a writer. I write a lot for film or for other sorts of medias. Um, I'm one of those people who loves working with a team, right? So I write with other people and I bring other people on to write the stories that I'm working on. Um, so while that probably wouldn't directly affect a fiction writer, what I will say is there's nothing more edifying than getting in a room with other people who are captivated about storytelling. And if you need to fuel yourself, sometimes we would share Firebreaker with a lot of our friends and a lot of people who would read it, and they would give us incredible criticism and we would retune it. I would say find good people you trust who can be honest with you, who love you so much that they will be brutally honest. That's the only way to get better at anything. If anyone comes and says, "Oh, that story was really good," that's not the person that you should be sharing it with. You should be sharing it with someone who will say, "On page 15, this is a horrible sentence. What were you thinking?" Or to can say, "Look, at top level, you're missing the beats. Try again." Um, I we I've just learned a lot about. I had a stance of my imagination is precious. It's my artistic vision and whatever for a while, and I would be reticent to share things with people because I was afraid. But it was literally just fear. and I was afraid that they would give me criticism, but I needed the criticism desperately. The criticism helps. So that's what I would say. Find your inklings.